Ted Cruz is not going anywhere after the House was successful in passing a bill that would continue to fund the government contingent on defunding Obamacare. He is taking to the media, taking to the airwaves to fight for what he sees as a necessary battle that will take place in the Senate, although many conservatives, many Republicans, both in politics and in the media, are not happy with it. And so we've got Cruz. He was on Fox News speaking about this, speaking about what he sees as an essential vote to stop cloture, because they want to filibuster what they see as a Democratic attempt to pass this without the language that would defund Obamacare. So let's listen to Ted Cruz.
I think next week, all Senate Republicans, I hope, should come together and support the House bill. In my view, Senate Republicans should stand united to stop Harry Reid from changing the House bill, and in particular, from inserting the funding from Obamacare with 51 votes. Any vote for cloture, any vote to allow Harry Reid to add funding for Obamacare with just a 51 vote threshold, a vote for cloture is a vote for Obamacare.
Now, obviously, Ted Cruz continues to listen to the many, both remaining rational Republicans and also independents and Democrats who tell him, we've done the basic arithmetic, you cannot win on this. Now, yes, they were able to pass the bill in the House, but the Senate is a very different beast. And even if they were able to somehow gather up 60 votes for a bill that would defund Obamacare, it would, of course, be vetoed by Obama, and they would not be able to get to 66. Now, we're going to talk about politically why Ted Cruz continues to engage in these sorts of political antics, these media antics, and certainly he has goals that might not end with the repeal of Obamacare, but it is amazing to see how Republicans and the conservative media are fracturing. Like, it's so difficult to continue to back up Ted Cruz when it seems like he is setting up both Republicans in the Senate for a potential failure, and he's going to make House Republicans look like an absolute laughingstock when they are forced in the near future to eventually pass a bill that would continue to fund the government without defunding the Affordable Care Act. Because I forget exactly who it was in the media, but they brought up a great analogy. You can't take a hostage that you refuse to shoot, or that it would be politically impossible to shoot. And while it's easy for them to talk about the debt ceiling as if they don't understand it, to talk about raising the debt limit as if they don't understand it, some of them are responsible enough to understand that they cannot do the possibly irreversible damage to the American economy that would result from not raising the debt ceiling. Surveys that have been done recently have shown that if that were to happen, the American public would blame the Republicans. And in a country where we're never more than about a year and a half away from an election, they simply cannot allow that to happen. And so Ted Cruz continues on his pointless and irrational quest to defund Obamacare. And what's interesting is that some of the more responsible Republicans and conservatives are fighting back. So Chris Wallace was saying that as soon as he announced that Ted Cruz was going to be on his show, there was a very interesting response from Republicans. So let's roll Chris Wallace.
As soon as we listed Ted Cruz as our featured guest this week, I got unsolicited research and questions, not from Democrats, but from top Republicans who to hammer Cruz. Why are Republicans so angry at Ted Cruz?
Well, because this was a strategy laid out by Mike Lee and Ted Cruz without any consultation with their colleagues.
Yeah, we've reached a weird place in American politics when Karl Rove is the most reasonable person in the room. Although he is not alone, to his credit, some people are, as I said, speaking out against this. We've got John McCain, who has had a pretty dicey track record in terms of the policy positions he's staked out in the past few months. But John McCain talking about this, he says, in the United States Senate, we will not repeal or defund Obamacare. We will not. And to think we can is not rational. To somehow think we are going to defund it is simply not going to happen at this time. And it will, in my opinion, as it did before, harm the American people's view of the Republican Party. We've got a couple of other quotes that are going to echo that in just a little bit, but it is interesting that Chris Wallace is sort of acting as if he doesn't understand the rival arguments here. He both understands that Ted Cruz is to some extent doing this for his own eventual medium and perhaps long-term political gain, and not because he thinks that they can actually do this. Now, a couple of months ago, when conservatives across the country were holding their town hall events and things of that sort, echoing Ted Cruz's words, at that point, while seemingly irrational in terms of the arithmetic, did potentially serve the purpose of changing public opinion. And it's not impossible to conceive of both the political opinion in the media and also across the country shifting enough that it could put pressure on some Democrats to possibly vote for the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Although even at that point, it would not have gotten past a presidential veto. But now we know what the numbers are. We know what is going to happen over the course of the next week. And Chris Wallace has to, I guess, act as for the purposes of the panel as if he does not understand that. Now, there are some people who do not actually understand what is going on. Sarah Palin is, you can always call on her to stand into that for that position. She was talking about this, about the attacks on Ted Cruz and him going back and forth with the blame game. Peter King, obviously, incredibly mad at Ted Cruz. And so Palin, she tries to articulate her argument as best she can. We know that even at the best of times, she has a hard time explaining what it is she's trying to say. So let's watch and see if we can decipher what she's saying.
Now, these GOP elephants that would turn on someone who is trying to fight for the will of the people, for liberty, and for economic justice, if you will, to have those turn on him is extremely disappointing. It's not surprising, though. What is surprising, though, is my dad, who is a science teacher, a natural history teacher. Dad, if you're watching this morning, if you're out of moose camp already in your home, you are a teacher, and you never told me that elephants were cannibalistic. I wish I would have known, and then we would have a different tactic in the way that we do campaign.
She loves her animal metaphors for some reason. Like, you could have just made the analogy. You didn't have to pretend that your father might be watching you on the air live. So she's mad both at the attacks on Ted Cruz. She's also mad at what we showed you before with Chris Wallace getting these anonymous sort of information about Ted Cruz, angles of attack and things of that sort. So she tweeted out asking for the sources to be named. She says, "Keep it truly fair and balanced on Fox News. Release the GOP names encouraging you to trash Senator Ted Cruz. No more anonymous sources." Now, I guess in general terms, I'm not in favor of anonymous sources either, although it seems odd in this particular case to expect any more clarity or the names to be revealed. It's probably not going to happen. And it's sort of, I suppose it's more reasonable for Sarah Palin at this point to say what she is, even if she's focusing on these elephant metaphors, because she is not running for office in the near future. I guess it's conceivable that she could run for president in the next couple of years, I suppose, although you would think that even in her political bubble, somebody would clue her to the fact that the American public is never going to rally majority support for her. But so she's doing this to get on the news. She's doing this to sell books, possibly to give speeches and things of that sort. Ted Cruz, as I've alluded to, probably doing this because he believes that it will gain him some long-term support among the Republican base. Yes, I know in previous weeks we've talked about how only between 7 and maybe 9% of even Republicans believe that it's worth it to possibly shut down the government to defund Obamacare. That's totally true, but that doesn't mean that long-term they won't look back and say, well, he was a leader, he was standing by himself, and that could possibly lead to some support for Ted Cruz. And so it's understandable from his point of view, but for the rest of the Republicans, especially in the House who pass this bill, what are you thinking? This isn't going to help you long-term. You're going to look like fools if, by any chance, this does result in America defaulting on its debt obligations. The blame is going to put, deservedly so, on the Republicans, and I imagine that will do long-lasting damage. Now, the last thing I want to go to, former Senator Judd Gregg, he's out of office now, so he's allowed to be reasonable. He says, most Americans these days are simply ignoring Republicans, and they should. The self-promotional babble of a few has become the mainstream of Republican political thought. It has marginalized the influence of the party to an appalling degree. To some extent, I feel like he's almost channeling Will McAvoy from Newsroom in his series finale speech that he gave on the Newsroom. Like, I understand that you're saying these crazy things because you think it's in your own personal long-term best interest, but as a member of a political party, you do or should have some responsibility to maintain a level of decorum, a level of rationality, a level of logic in terms of how you approach these issues. Because at the end of the day, it's not just your political future that's at stake. It's not just the future of the Republican Party that's at stake. The future of the American economy, the future of America itself is at stake. And I don't think that really anyone other than Judd Gregg and possibly John McCain is actually serving the interests of the American people in this case.